Antwerp, French, Anvers, is a city in Belgium which is the capital of Antwerp province. With a population of 510,610, it is the most populous city in Flanders. Its metropolitan area houses around 1,200,000 people. Antwerp is on the River Scheldt, linked to the North Sea by the Westerschelde estuary. The port of Antwerp is one of the biggest in the world, ranking third in Europe and within the top 20 globally. Antwerp has long been an important city in the Low Countries, both economically and culturally, especially before the Spanish Fury and the Dutch Revolt. The inhabitants of Antwerp are nicknamed Sinjoren, after the Spanish honorific seigneur or French seigneur, lord, referring to the Spanish noblemen who ruled the city in the 17th century. History. Origin of the name according to folklore, notably celebrated by a statue in front of the town hall. The city got its name from a legend about a giant called Antwerp who lived near the Scheldt River. He exacted a toll from passing boatmen, and for those who refused, he severed one of their hands and threw it into the river. Eventually the giant was killed by a young hero named Silvius Brabor, who cut off the giant's own hand and flung it into the river. Hence the name Antwerpen, from Dutch handwerpen, akin to Old English hand and werpan, which has evolved to today's warp. A long-standing theory is that the name originated in the Gallo-Roman period and comes from the Latin Antverpia. Antverpia would come from Antiverpia, indicating land that forms by deposition in the inside curve of a river. Note that the River Scheldt, before a transition period between 600 to 750, followed a different track. This must have coincided roughly with the current ringway south of the city, situating the city within a former curve of the river. However, many historians think it unlikely that there was a large settlement which would be named Antverpia, but more something like an outpost with a river crossing. However, John Lothrop Motley argues, and so do a lot of Dutch etymologists and historians, that Antwerp's name derives from the TWERF. TWERP is also possible. This warp is a man-made hill or a river deposit, high enough to remain dry at high tide, whereupon a construction could be built that would remain dry. Another word for WERP is pol, hence polders. Pre-1500 historical Antwerp allegedly had its origins in a Gallo-Roman vicus. Excavations carried out in the oldest section near the Scheldt, 1952 to 1961, produced pottery shards and fragments of glass from mid-2nd century to the end of the 3rd century. The earliest mention of Antwerp dates from the 4th century. In the 4th century, Antwerp was first named, having been settled by the Germanic Franks. The name was reputed to have been derived from ander and werpum. The Merovingian Antwerp was evangelized by Saint Amand in the 7th century. At the end of the 10th century, the Scheldt became the boundary of the Holy Roman Empire. Antwerp became a margraviate in 980, by the German Emperor Otto I, a border province facing the county of Flanders. In the 11th century, Godfrey of Bouillon was for some years known as the Marquis of Antwerp. In the 12th century, Norbert of Xanten established a community of his Premonstratensian canons at St. Michael's Abbey at Callioes. Antwerp was also the headquarters of Edward III during his early negotiations with Jacob van Artevelde, and his son Lionel, the Duke of Clarence, was born there in 1338. 16th century. After the silting up of the Zwin and the consequent decline of Bruges, the city of Antwerp, then part of the Duchy of Brabant, grew in importance. At the end of the 15th century, the foreign trading houses were transferred from Bruges to Antwerp, and the building assigned to the English nation is specifically mentioned in 1510. Antwerp became the sugar capital of Europe, importing the raw commodity from Portuguese and Spanish plantations. The city attracted Italian and German sugar refiners by 1550, and shipped their refined product to Germany, especially Cologne. Moneylenders and financiers did a large business lending money to the English government in 1544 to 1574. London bankers were too small to operate on that scale, and Antwerp had a highly efficient bourse that itself attracted rich bankers from around Europe. After the 1570s, the city's banking business declined. England ended its borrowing in Antwerp in 1574. Fernand Braudel states that Antwerp became the center of the entire international economy, something Bruges had never been even at its height. Antwerp was the richest city in Europe at this time. Antwerp's golden age is tightly linked to the age of exploration. During the first half of the 16th century, Antwerp grew to become the second largest European city north of the Alps. Many foreign merchants were resident in the city. Francesco Guicciardini, the Venetian envoy, stated that hundreds of ships would pass in a day, and 2,000 carts entered the city each week. Portuguese ships laden with pepper and cinnamon would unload their cargo. According to Luc Normand Tellier, it is estimated that the port of Antwerp was earning the Spanish crown 7 times more revenues than the Americas, without a long-distance merchant fleet, and governed by an oligarchy of banker aristocrats forbidden to engage in trade. The economy of Antwerp was foreigner-controlled, which made the city very cosmopolitan, with merchants and traders from Venice, Ragusa, Spain and Portugal. Antwerp had a policy of toleration, which attracted a large Orthodox Jewish community. Antwerp experienced 3 booms during its golden age. The first based on the pepper market, a second launched by American silver coming from Seville, and a third boom after the stabilizing Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis in 1559, based on the textiles industry. At the beginning of the 16th century, Antwerp accounted for 40% of world trade. The boom and bust cycles and inflationary cost of living squeezed less skilled workers. In the century after 1541, however, the city's economy and population declined dramatically, while rival Amsterdam experienced massive growth. The religious revolution of the Reformation erupted in violent riots in August 1566, as in other parts of the Low Countries. The regent Margaret, Duchess of Parma, was swept aside when Philip II sent the Duke of Alba at the head of an army the following summer. When the 80 Years' War broke out in 1568, commercial trading between Antwerp and the Spanish port of Bilbao collapsed and became impossible. On 4 November 1576, Spanish soldiers sacked the city during the so-called Spanish Fury. 7,000 citizens were massacred, 800 houses were burnt down, and over £2 million of damage was done. Subsequently, the city joined the Union of Utrecht in 1579 and became the capital of the Dutch Revolt. In 1585, Alessandro Farnese, Duke of Parma and Piacenza, captured it after a long siege, and as part of the terms of surrender its Protestant citizens were given 2 years to settle their affairs before quitting the city. Most went to the United Provinces in the north, starting the Dutch Golden Age. Antwerp's banking was controlled for a generation by Genoa, and Amsterdam became the new trading centre. 17th–19th centuries. The recognition of the independence of the United Provinces by the Treaty of Munster in 1648 stipulated that the Scheldt should be closed to navigation, which destroyed Antwerp's trading activities. This impediment remained in force until 1863, although the provisions were relaxed during French rule from 1795 to 1814, and also during the time Belgium formed part of the Kingdom of the United Netherlands. Antwerp had reached the lowest point in its fortunes in 1800, and its population had sunk to under 40,000, when Napoleon, realizing its strategic importance, assigned funds to enlarge the harbour by constructing a new dock and an access lock and mole and deepening the Scheldt to allow for larger ships to approach Antwerp. Napoleon hoped that by making Antwerp's harbour the finest in Europe he would be able to counter the Port of London and hamper British growth. However, he was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo before he could see the plan through. In 1830, the city was captured by the Belgian insurgents, but the citadel continued to be held by a Dutch garrison under General David Hendrik Chasset. For a time, Chasset subjected the town to periodic bombardment, which inflicted much damage, and at the end of 1832 the citadel itself was besieged by the French Northern Army commanded by Maréchal Gérard. During this attack the town was further damaged. In December 1832, after a gallant defense, Chasset made an honorable surrender, ending the siege of Antwerp. Later that century, a double ring of Briarmont fortresses was constructed some 10 kilometers from the city centre, as Antwerp was considered vital for the survival of the young Belgian state. And in the last decade Antwerp presented itself to the world via a World's Fair attended by 3 million. 20th century Antwerp was the first city to host the World Gymnastics Championships in 1903. During World War I, the city became the fallback point of the Belgian army after the defeat at Liege. The siege of Antwerp lasted for 11 days, but the city was taken after heavy fighting by the German army, and the Belgians were forced to retreat westwards. Antwerp remained under German occupation until the armistice. Antwerp hosted the 1920 Summer Olympics. During World War II, the city was an important strategic target because of its port. It was occupied by Germany in May 1940 and liberated by the British 11th Armoured Division on 4 September 1944. After this, the Germans attempted to destroy the port of Antwerp, which was used by the Allies to bring new material ashore. Thousands of Rheinbote V-1 and V-2 missiles battered the city. The city was hit by more V-2s than all other targets during the entire war combined. But the attack did not succeed in destroying the port since many of the missiles fell upon other parts of the city. As a result, the city itself was severely damaged and rebuilt after the war in a modern style. After the war, Antwerp, which had already had a sizable Jewish population before the war, once again became a major European center of Haredi Orthodox Judaism. Reichert argued for the importance of the 10-year plan for the port of Antwerp. It expanded and modernized the port's infrastructure over a 10-year period, with national funding, intended to build a set of canal docks. The broader importance was to facilitate the growth of the northeastern Antwerp metropolitan region, which attracted new industry. Extending the linear layout along the Scheldt River, planners designed further urbanization along the same linear city model. Satellite communities would be connected to the main strip. Reichert argues that in contrast to the more confused Europort plan for the port of Rotterdam, the Antwerp approach succeeded because of flexible and strategic implementation of the project as a co-production between various authorities and private parties. Starting in the 1990s, Antwerp rebranded itself as a world-class fashion center. Emphasizing the avant-garde, it tried to compete with London, Milan, New York and Paris. It emerged from organized tourism and mega-cultural events. Municipality. The municipality comprises the city of Antwerp proper and several towns. It is divided into 9 entities: Antwerp, Berchem, Barendrecht Zandvliet Lillo, Borgerhout, Deurne, Eekeren, Hoboken, Merksem, Wilrijk. In 1958, in preparation of the 10-year development plan for the port of Antwerp, the municipalities of Barendrecht Zandvliet Lillo were integrated into the city territory and lost their administrative independence. During the 1983 merger of municipalities, conducted by the Belgian government as an administrative simplification, the municipalities of Berchem, Borgerhout, Deurne, Eekeren, Hoboken, Merksem and Wilrijk were merged into the city. At that time the city was also divided into the districts mentioned above. Simultaneously, districts received an appointed district council. Later district councils became elected bodies. Buildings, landmarks and museums. In the 16th century, Antwerp was noted for the wealth of its citizens. The houses of these wealthy merchants and manufacturers have been preserved throughout the city. However, fire has destroyed several old buildings, such as the House of the Hanseatic League on the Northern Quays in 1891. The city also suffered considerable war damage by V-bombs, and in recent years other noteworthy buildings were demolished for new developments. Antwerp Zoo was founded in 1843, and is home to more than 6,000 animals. One of the oldest zoos in the world, it is renowned for its high level of research and conservation. Antwerp City Hall dates from 1565, and is a belfry in Renaissance style. Central Station is a railway station designed by Louis de la Sanzari that was completed in 1905. It has two monumental neo-Baroque facades, a large metal and glass dome and a gilt and marble interior. Cathedral of Our Lady. This church was begun in the 14th century and finished in 1518. The church has four works by Rubens, viz. The Descent from the Cross, the Elevation of the Cross, the Resurrection of Christ, and the Assumption. St. James Church is more ornate than the cathedral. It contains the tomb of Rubens. The Church of St. Paul has a beautiful Baroque interior. It is a few hundred yards north of the Grote Markt. Museum Vlies Huis is a fine Gothic brick-built building sited a short distance to the northwest of the Grote Markt. Originally used as a home for the Butchers' Guild, these days it holds a musical instrument collection and is home to occasional concerts. Plantin Mauritius Museum preserves the house of the printer Christoffel Plantin and his successor Jan Mauritius. The St. Boniface Church is an Anglican church and head seat of the Archdeaconry Northwest Europe. Boeeren Toren or KBC Tower, a 26-story building built in 1932, is the oldest skyscraper in Europe. Royal Museum of Fine Arts, close to the Southern Quays, has a collection of old masters and the leading Dutch masters. Rubens Huis is the former home and studio of Peter Paul Rubens in Antwerp. It is now a museum. Exchange or Bourse. The current building was built in 1872. Law Courts, designed by the Richard Rogers Partnership, Arup and VK Studio, and opened by King Albert in April 2006. This building is the antithesis of the heavy, dark court building designed by Joseph Poelet that dominates the skyline of Brussels. The courtrooms sit on top of six fingers that radiate from an airy, central hall, and are surmounted by spires which provide north light and resemble oast houses or the sails of barges on the nearby river Scheldt. It is built on the site of the old Zoud station, at the end of a magnificent 1.5 kilometers perspective at the southern end of Americali. The road neatly disappears into an underpass under Oval Boulevard Platz to join the motorway ring. This leaves peaceful surface access by foot, bicycle or tram. The building's highest sail is 51 meters high, has a floor area of 77,000 square meters, and cost €130 million. Zurenborg, a late 19th century Belle Epoque neighborhood on the border of Antwerp and Berchem with many Art Nouveau architectural elements. The area counts as one of the most original Belle Epoque urban expansion areas in Europe. Though the houses in the neighborhood are listed as national heritage, they suffer severely from vibration and pollution caused by heavy city bus traffic through its streets, especially through the famous Kogels Osselij. Museum Aan Distrum. The mast is 60 meters high, and was designed by Nuteling's Riedijk architects. The facade is made of Indian red sandstone and curved glass panel construction. The mast has 470,000 objects, most of which are kept in storage. Fortifications. Although Antwerp was formerly a fortified city, hardly anything remains of the former enceinte. Only some remains of the city wall can be seen near the Vlies Huis Museum at the corner of Bledberg and Birchgracht. A replica of a named Steen has been partly rebuilt near the Scheldt quays in the 19th century. Antwerp's development as a fortified city is documented between the 10th and the 20th century. The fortifications were developed in different phases. 10th century. Fortification of the wharf with a wall and a ditch. 12th and 13th century. Canals were made. 16th century. Spanish fortifications. 19th century. Double ring of Brialmont forts around the city. Dismantling of the Spanish fortifications. 20th century. 1960 dismantling of the inner ring of forts, decommissioning of the outer ring of forts. Demographics. Historical population. This is the population of the city of Antwerp only, not of the larger current municipality of the same name. Minorities. In 2010, 36 to 39% of the inhabitants of Antwerp had a migrant background. A study projects that in 2020 55% of the population will be of migrant background. Jewish community. After the Holocaust and the destruction of its many semi-assimilated Jews, Antwerp became a major center for Orthodox Jews. At present, about 15,000 Haredi Jews, many of them Hasidic, live in Antwerp. The city has 3 official Jewish congregations. Shomrei Hadass, headed by Rabbi Dovid Moshe Lieberman, Maxike Hadass, headed by Rabbi Sekel Pollack of Brussels, and the Portuguese community Ben Moshe. Antwerp has an extensive network of synagogues, shops, schools and organizations. Significant Hasidic movements in Antwerp include Savorsk, based in Antwerp, as well as branches of Satmar, Belz, Barbov, Ger, Sker, Klausenberg and several others. Rabbi Chaim Kraisworth, chief rabbi of the Maxike Hadass community, who died in 2003, was arguably one of the better-known personalities to have been based in Antwerp. An attempt to have a street named after him has received the support of the town hall and is in the process of being implemented. Jain community. The Jain community in Antwerp is mostly involved in the very lucrative diamond business.